Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into the Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo. It's great to be with you today. That theme music, I love it. It should get your heart pumping because it's time for us to do our workouts in order to better explain, defend, share the faith with clarity and charity with whomever we may talk to. And it's, like I said, it's great to be with you. We have a great program in store for you today. Dr. Brian Bradford's going to come on the show, and we're going to talk about Islam. What do we need to know about Islam? Some basic facts, things to keep in our war kit, because you never know. You might run into somebody who is a Muslim, or you might run into other people who are encountering Islam. You need to know some basics about it. So that's what the show's going to be about. I wanted him to kind of cover all the basics. So we're going to cover everything from did Muhammad exist to, how did the Quran start? What's the story? All sorts of stuff, So everything Islamic. And, of course, we've had Dr. Bradford on the show before. He's just an incredible source of information. And has written several books on Islam from academic perspective, and I think also from a Christian perspective. And it's very, very helpful stuff. So that's going to come on the other side of the break. And we also are going to do our critical thinking exercises. We're going to do our Finding the Fallacy. And the Finding the Fallacy today is the argument from ignorance. And also we're going to meet an early church father who is Aristides of Athens. So Aristides of Athens. Not exactly a household name, but, those are kind of my favorites. I love learning about people that, you commonly don't run into in prayer books and things such as that. But nevertheless, they do make up that giant, wonderful corpus of early Christian writings. It's so important for defending the faith. So, welcome aboard, everybody. I want to give my shout-outs to those watching on social media, on live stream, Facebook, YouTube. Hello, everybody. Nice to see names. Yes, I did catch the emoji explosion at the beginning of the program, so thank you very much. Appreciate it. I also appreciate all of you listening in on wonderful Catholic radio stations, both in America and outside America, and also via podcast at our flagship website at virginmostpowerfulradio.org. If you haven't visited the website, check it out. There's lots of great stuff on there. You can access all the great programming through Virgin Most Powerful on the website. And also the program's available through phone app. So I know a lot of us, we listen, maybe not so much to the radio in our car as much as streaming on phone apps through our car. And there is a Virgin Most Powerful phone app. Download it, because not only do you get to listen to the program live, but you also have access to podcasts and a whole bunch of really great information. So check it out. All right, let's see. Anybody has questions for our guest on the other side of the break on Islam and apologetics with Islam? He's the man to talk to. Give us a call toll-free at 888-526-2151. That's 888-526-2151. And, of course, you can always email your questions at handsonapologetics.com, which is the official dojo mailbox. Please use that one. I have a couple of mailboxes, entry forms and stuff. I've noticed some people have been asking questions through the request system for me to give talks, which is fine, but it's just that's something I normally don't check on a lot. So, if you do it that way, it's going to take a little while to get a response. But if you go to the questions at Hands-On Apologetics, you'll get a decent response. I am a little bit behind. Just FYI, for those who have emailed me questions, I did receive them. Trust me, I will respond. It's just been, it's been a busy week in the dojo, and I've been have several writing, writing projects that I'm involved in, and it's a little slow, but I will get there. I promise. Thank you so much for your patience. All right, so why don't we jump into the program, shall we, with the finding of the fallacy. Today's finding of the fallacy is the argument from ignorance. The argument from ignorance, it's also known as an appeal to ignorance, or just ignorance. It's known as the lack of evidence to the contrary argument, which pretty much says it all. And this is an informal logic where something is said to be true because it has not been proven false. Also, it's known as a negative proof fallacy. So you're arguing for the existence of something, and someone says, well, fine, give me proof. Or you say, well, it hasn't been disproved, so therefore it must exist. You can't do that. That's not good. That's a fallacious way of arguing. Does this happen? Yes, I think it does. I think it happens for people who really haven't engaged in defending the faith, newbies, both not only in the faith but outside the faith. They really haven't thought through their arguments very well. But it does occur, not very often. Like I said, you won't find this thing typically in something written on an academic level for sure, although sometimes you do. But generally you find it in conversation. So just be aware of it. If someone says something is true because it hasn't been proven false, well then, that is an argument from ignorance. Point it out and diffuse it. Very, very good. All right, so that's our finding the fallacy for today. Why don't we jump to the Meet the Early Church Father? Like I said, he's not very well known, but nevertheless he is an important early church father. His name's Aristides of Athens. Of Aristides, we know basically nothing beyond what information is provided by Eusebius in this church history. That's almost like a mantra for this category, Meet the Early Fathers. If it wasn't for Eusebius's church history, our knowledge of early Christian writings would be greatly diminished. So thank God for that. It basically says of him that he was a man of faith and devoted to our religion. And in another place implies that he was a philosopher in the city of Athens. Only by dating his work can we provide the date for his life. And the work we're talking about is his apology, his apologia. That's really the only work we have from Aristides of Athens, and it's written sometime around 40. So I'll explain how we came up with that. An Armenian fragment of an apology bearing the title To the Emperor Hadrian Caesar from the Athenian philosopher Aristides, which is now known definitely to be part of what's known as the Armenian translation of the Apology of Aristides. For internal reasons, suggests that the work is addressed not to the emperor familiarly known as Hadrian, right, but actually to his successor, Antonius Pius. And it's interesting that a lot of early defenses of the faith are addressed to Antonius Pius, whose fuller name, I won't give this fuller name, but it actually includes the word Hadrian in it. So you could see where there would be some confusion. Anyway, his reign was roughly around AD 138 to 161 AD. And therefore, this work is generally placed around the beginning of Antonius's reign, which would make it about AD 140, which is a very, very early church writing, not part of the Apostolic Fathers, yet nevertheless towards the beginning of what's known as the Age of Apologists in early church writings. Now, all we had was the Armenian fragment, but in 1889, J.R. Harris discovered a complete text of the Apology of Aristides in Syriac. So there's a Syriac translation that was discovered, and previously the work was unknown, or it was basically only known by its title and by the fragment, that Armenian fragment that I just mentioned earlier. Well, with the discovery of the Syriac translation, lo and behold, it turns out that we've actually had Aristides' apology to the emperor for a long, long time. The only thing is it was mislabeled the whole time. It became evident that the Greek text, which is usually incorporated, was attributed to either John Damascene in a work called Barlaam and Josaphat, was actually chapters 26 and 27 were the Apology of Aristides. So I love these little quirks in church history. If we didn't find this, we would never have known that we actually have the complete work on hand. But thanks to the discovery of the Syriac translation, we now know that actually we do have the Greek of the Apology of Aristides. And in 1922 and 24, 2 large fragments of the original Greek text was published from papyri in the British Museum. So the Apology of Aristides, it turns out to be the oldest extant Christian apology. Only a short fragment of the older Apology of Quadratius, which we talked about in a previous program, has been preserved. So it's among the earliest extra-biblical defenses of Christianity. We should put it that way, because obviously the New Testament is earlier. It's worth reading. I'm going to read as much as I can. There's a portion where he talks specifically about Christians. He says this, quote, Christians trace their origin to the Lord Jesus Christ, who came down from heaven in the Holy Spirit for the salvation of men, is confessed to be the Son of the Most High God. He was born of the Holy Virgin without seed of man, and took flesh without defilement. He appeared among men so that he might recall them from the error of polytheism, when he had accomplished his wonderful design by his own free will, and by a mighty purpose he tasted death on the cross. After 3 days, however, he came back to life again and went up into the heavens. And that is our early church father, Aristides of Athens. Coming up on the other side of the break, Dr. Brian Bradford on Islam 101. Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome to our January 11th, 2020 Spiritual Warfare Conference. Every year without fail, this is our most popular, well-attended event. This year's Spiritual Warfare Conference will host Adam Bly, a Catholic demonologist, and an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists, along with Dr. Luis Sandoval, a psychiatrist who's part of the Healing, Deliverance, and Exorcism team for the Diocese of Orange. These two gentlemen bring tons of experience and expertise in the area of spiritual warfare. This is going to be a high-information Catholic seminar. I'll be there as well, sharing some riveting stories on the diabolical and liberation found through Jesus Christ from my best-selling book, The Devil in the City of Angels. Mark your calendars, come and join us, and meet other radio hosts from Jesus 911. Contrary to popular belief, spiritual warfare is not demon-centered, it's Christ-centered. Come join us and learn how to armor up and fight the good fight of faith. Catholics, wake up. Don't hit the snooze button. Join us at St. Christopher Catholic Church, 629 South Glendora Avenue, West Covina, California, on January 11, 2020. See you then. Strength and honor in Jesus' name.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. Well, Islam. I think a lot of us Catholics, we really don't understand Islam. We don't even understand very much about Muhammad, who, of course, is at the very center of the Islamic faith in a way, as their prophet and their originator. So to help kind of clarify fact from fiction in regards to Muhammad and Islam, we have Dr. Brian Bradford. Dr. Bradford received his PhD from Western Michigan University in early Islamic studies. He's the author of several books, including Muhammad's Jesus, Quran parallels with non-biblical text in Arabian religion before Muhammad, and Surah 1 through 35 in chronological order. Dr. Brian Bradford, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Hi, Gary. Great to be back.
Oh, it's always fun to have you back as well. Every time you come on, it's been like I feel like I'm taking a crash course in Islam and history. It's such great information. Thank you so much for doing all your research.
Sure. Like you said, it's an important thing for Catholics to know where all this came from and where it's going, too.
Yeah, and your thesis was a fascinating thesis in that you kind of looked at some of the pre-Islamic roots of Islam. Maybe if you can give us like a thumbnail sketch of your findings in that regard?
Well, what I looked at was all the verses in the Quran that mention Jesus. And I thought to myself, okay, if we accept Muhammad was a traveling merchant of the 7th century and he was surrounded by Christians and Jews who lived in the desert and these monks praying in their caves, that sort of thing, then where did these verses originate from? And long story short, if you look into the verses that talk about Jesus being born in the Quran, miracles he performed, his not crucifixion, I guess is the way to put it, they all originate in stories and text as far back as, the 3rd and 4th century. So that conclusion was, well, if these verses are not original to Muhammad's revelations, then what else can we find in the Quran that deserves more historical attention, even the character of Muhammad himself?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that brings us right up to our subject today. Yeah, who is Muhammad? And, Dr. Bradford, a while back, Robert Spencer wrote a book where he questioned whether or not Muhammad existed. Is that debate still continuing, or has it pretty much been settled?
Unfortunately, it's very controversial and contentious because when you bring that up in the Islamic world, that is a question they cannot even fathom somebody would ask.
Sure.
But unfortunately, when you look at it from even an academic perspective, if you try to approach that, you run into a lot of political uneasiness and a lot of, there's 2 billion people in the world that would say to you, how can you even ask that question? But it's not only Robert Spencer. I think his book was, 2012, I think. There's other historians who have looked at this too. And the general feeling is that the historical Muhammad was, for lack of a better term, a literary creation starting about the year 800, give or take, because we have to remember that pre-Islamic Arab culture was not a literate society. They didn't write down everything. They didn't have a collection of great stories like we have, for example, in the Greek culture that wrote the New Testament. There's a scattering of inscriptions on rocks and things here and there. But when you start to look at, the new Arab empire needed a historical narrative with a prophet and a holy text to substantiate and stand as a foundation for their current political position. So they had to start scurrying about to find traditional tales, to find text, to find stories to put together in these documents to develop a historical account for this prophet that they believed in.
Right. Yeah, very good. So, Muhammad could have been a literary construction, according to these critics. And the counterpoints are just the fact that they exist. I imagine that would be a pretty strong point for his existence.
Well, if you look at, there's about 10 Christian documents that deal with the early Islamic conquests and Muhammad and who he was. And unfortunately, the Arab world says, or the Muslim world says, well, you can't use these because they're Christian and they're biased texts. And I say, well, as a historian, you have to look at every document that you have. And we don't see Muhammad really mentioned on coins until about the year 685. And he's not on inscriptions until about the year 690. Remember, he dies approximately the year 630 to 632. Even that's a contention when he was actually born and when he actually died. That's another topic that goes along with this as well.
Sure.
But I argue, like I mentioned, Gary, that they weren't a literate society, so writing historical narratives was not even really a cultural aspect of that. And I think Muhammad did exist because he is mentioned by name in some of the early Christian documents we have, but then people come back and say, well, you can also say that Muhammad is a title, and it means the praised one or the highly praised one, and it doesn't necessarily refer to a personal name of an individual. So even that's a contention when you talk about his name.
Right. So even though the Christians may have heard about this person named Muhammad, they would say, well, that's they wasn't actually referring to an actual historic person, but rather just to a title.
Right. Some other historians think that there was perhaps a type of messianic Arab movement that was trying to get a collective leader to regain the Holy Land, to be in a type of uniform belief with Christians and Jews. And maybe there was a series of prophets that taught this. And maybe Muhammad was the one who just, for lack of a better term, won out historically and was giving all these titles and these attributes that we see in a lot of the monastic texts that were written about as early as I said, about the 300s or 400s when Christian monasticism started in the Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, right. Very good. And your own work is with pre-Islamic ideas, found in Christian and other cultures. Are there evidence of like how the Muslims understand Muhammad in pre-existing cultures as well? In other words, were there ideas in circulation that later was probably appended to Muhammad?
Well, if you look at what I like to call historical prototypes for Muhammad, now if you read through all the monastic histories that we have, the monks of Syria, the monks of Palestine, even from the Panarion by Epiphanius of Salamis, you can make up a list of just about 10 common traits that are ascribed to various monastic individuals that you can put side by side with traits given to Muhammad in the later Muslim literature, and they're identical. So you ask yourself, well, okay, was there a existing prototype, a type of a hagiographical template, I guess you could say, for Muhammad? And through my studies, it appears that there most indeed was something that the Arab historians relied on to write these histories about Muhammad.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Oh, well, what would be a typical attribute? Give us an example.
Well, you have there's fasting and praying in a cave or in seclusion. There's angelic visitations. There's a personal angelic guide who would accompany them. You have the use of spiritual rhetoric or language, I like to call. You have somebody acting as a spokesman for God. You have somebody who memorizes and repeats a spiritual holy text to visitors or to a community. You have somebody who destroys local pagan idols or statues. Somebody who stresses a personal closeness, especially a type of spiritual kinship with Old Testament individuals who appear to them in dreams or visions or actually physically appear before them. You have a power to negotiate with God. And finally, you have the collection of spiritual visions into a holy book that is meant for a community. And we see all this among not only Christian monks, starting about in the 400s probably, but you have these same attributes, these 10 that I just talked about, applied to Muhammad in the later Islamic literature. So you ask, well, okay, if that's proven, then how much historical Muhammad is really can we take away from these Muslim texts? It's a very interesting, yet unfortunately controversial question when you get into this.
Oh, sure. Yeah, because it's who's dependent on whom? I mean,
Right.
Was Muhammad a unique, the story unique, or is it something that was attributed to him by early sources?
Right. It's hard to figure out exactly. I mean, there's three individuals that I have come up with that I think stand as prototypes, I guess we could call it, for Muhammad. Number one would just be the general collective Christian ascetics who lived in the modern-day Arabian Peninsula and Jordan and parts of Yemen as well, who lived in caves and deserts and sought God through prayer, or lived on top of pillars, who said were to have been visited by angels and that sort of thing. And the second one is an interesting individual taken from the biography of Muhammad. His name is Zayd ibn Amir. Now, remember, Gary, that Muhammad died approximately 630, like I mentioned, but the real first biographical text about his life isn't approximately till 200 years later. So that leaves a lot of time for editing, for innovation, for cutting and pasting, for lack of a better term, to come up with an ideal monotheistic individual. Now, this individual, Zayd ibn Amir, resembles Muhammad very much because he, like Muhammad later, he gets disillusioned with traditional Arab stone worship, and he pledges with his three friends to find the true monotheism of Abraham. He travels to Syria to question Jews and Christians about scriptural matters, about beliefs, about theology. And this Zayd ibn Amir is not satisfied with their responses, so he eventually concludes, well, the only true form of worship is that of Allah without any partner. But a funny footnote for that is that his three friends all became Christians, so I guess that's something that's kind of an ironic undertone there. But
yeah, interesting. And who's the third individual? We only have a couple of seconds, but...
Well, the third individual, he's called the Prophet's Poet. His name is Hassan ibn Thabit, and he was, much like Muhammad was in the cave with Gabriel, this poet was attacked on the city streets by a female jinn or genie, a type of spiritual entity, who jumped upon him, pressed him down, and compelled him to write 3 verses of poetry. When you compare that story side by side with Muhammad in the cave, those two are nearly identical.
Yeah.
So we have to ask ourselves, okay, you have these 10 attributes, you have these 3 individuals, which look like more and more as templates or prototypes for, I don't want to say the word inventing, but helping establish or somewhat glorify this individual that historically became known as Muhammad. Very
interesting. Well, we're chatting with Dr. Brian Bradford about, I guess, Islam 101, going through the basics. And it's going to get ready for a crash course, folks. It's going to be lots of great new information coming at you. Listen to Hands On Apologetics. We'll be right back.
Welcome, Daniel. You're on the line. What's on your mind, brother?
Hi, I just wanted to share a testimony about Virgin Most Powerful Radio. I had a buddy at work who, he's a lukewarm Catholic guy, and I wanted him to start listening to the Terry and Jesse show, so I kept telling him to download the app, and he kept putting me off. So one day, I grabbed his phone and I downloaded the app for him. I went on vacation, and I kept telling him to listen to it. He would kind of put me off. I came back from vacation. He comes to my cubicle and he says to me, "Hey, man, I've been listening to Terry and Jesse's show, and it's great." And it's made a big impact in his life. The guy, he's going to weekly adoration a couple times a week. He goes to the Mass in the morning. Mm-hmm. He's an on-fire Catholic, and he promotes the Terry and Jesse show and the Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
Wow. Daniel, what a testimony. And I want to encourage our listeners to get those cards by going to virginmostpowerfulradio.org and do what Daniel's doing. Go out and spread the faith by inviting people to listen to Virgin Most Powerful. Daniel, thanks for your testimony, brother. God love you.
You're welcome.
This is Terry Barber. I want to invite you to take advantage of having your funeral or your loved one's funeral at the Sacred Heart Chapel in downtown Covina. It's a 115-year-old church, beautiful chapel. And all you got to do is call me at 661-972-7872, and I'll personally make the arrangements with your mortuary to have your funeral or your loved one's funeral here at Sacred Heart Chapel. You won't regret it.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Dr. Bradford on Islam and the roots of Islam and just learning about the basics of Islam. And specifically, we're talking about Muhammad. And before the break, very interesting, 3 characters that certainly, they have similar characteristics to Muhammad. Dr. Bradford, let's go to sources. Like, what are some of the earliest sources about Muhammad?
Well, there's a collection of about 10, and these are good sources because they give some of the earliest information on the Islamic conquests, but they can also be criticized because we have to remember at this time that there wasn't really a set of uniform or precise dates and calendars that were used. So sometimes we have a couple sources that mention Muhammad appeared in the year 620. Well, what does that really mean? Is that when he was born? Was that his first revelation, his first attack on a caravan? We can't really be sure. But I'll go through these and summarize the points as quickly as I can. We have Stephen of Alexandria writing, he dies about the year 630. So he dies approximately around the same time Muhammad. He talks about a certain man from the tribe of Ishmael, whose name was Muhammad. This man said he was a prophet. And Stephen tells us that this man appeared in the year 620, and he brought a new expression and a strange teaching, promising to those who accept him victories in war, domination over their enemies, and delights in paradise. Now, if we put that together, that sounds like some very early references to some Quranic chapters and verses. Now, we know the Quran wasn't put together this early quite yet, but that could suggest to us that maybe these verses were actually floating around somewhere. The next source dates to about the year 634. It's called the Doctrines of Jacob. And this identifies Muhammad as a prophet who appeared with the Saracens. And the Saracens is just a kind of a generic term that was used by Greek and Byzantine historians to describe the Arab people as a collective group. This doctrine says that this prophet was proclaiming the arrival of the Anointed One, the Christ, but continues to say this prophet is false because he comes with a sword. We are instead preparing for him as the Antichrist. And the source continues, there's no truth to be found in this man. He only sheds blood. And he says he has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. So there's a few things that are starting to correspond to some of these other sources about victory, about combat, and that sort of thing. Another source we have from the 660s tells us, now the term Islam wasn't used until much later. Now they're called the Arabs, the Ishmaelites, being the descendants of Ishmael. They're called Hagarenes, or the descendants of Hagar. And it talks a lot in this particular verse, or this source, I should say, about going to physically take possession of the land that Abraham promised you, which sounds a little like a quasi-Jewish movement that started with some of these followers. Some other sources call him leader of the sons of Ishmael. We have another source from the year 700 who says that Muhammad traveled to the lands of modern Israel, Jordan, Arabian Peninsula, and Lebanon, and to seek kind of a scriptural truth, talking with Christians and Jews about God. What is God? What does God mean for the Arab people, and that sort of thing. Another one dates to the early 700s as well, and it says Muhammad's followers relied on some type of holy book. Now, it says that they professed to accept the Old Testament. and they acknowledge the coming of Christ, but nevertheless are far removed from the Old and New Testament, and instead demand the local Christians profess their faith from the book they acknowledge. So that must be a reference to the Quran, I would think, at that early point. But again, there's really no details about what all this means.
Yeah.
And there's a few other sources that mention, there's some Greek and Syrian chronologies that are talking about Muhammad coming upon the earth in the year 620, dying in the year 627, not being born until the year 724. So those dates don't really correspond to any traditional timeline we have. Now, it doesn't mean that they're false or fabricated sources. It just means, like I mentioned earlier, there wasn't a uniform calendar. The dates were usually come up or designed the reign of a certain king or some strange event in the sky, like a meteor landing. People would say that's day one or year one of something. So there's a lot of debate about these particular dates when you try to come up with a standard chronology for when Muhammad was, where he was, what he taught, and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. So what can we learn about Muhammad's early life?
Well, his early life it's hard to find any true historical facts because, as I mentioned, there's about 2 centuries of a gap between when he supposedly died and when the first texts are written by him. For example, it says at his birth that a bright light could be seen all the way to Syria, which was a common description used to apply to Christian monks when goers by would see them in their caves and praying and have angelic visitations. And there's even a few non-canonical Gospels that say when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, you could see the light as far away as Syria. So there's probably some borrowing there from Muhammad's birth as well to try to paint it in a picture of another monotheistic prophet, the final prophet coming along that was ordained in some of these non-canonical scriptures as well. And when we talk about the year he was born, that's another problem because they say without a doubt, Muslim scholars, he was born in the year 570 because that's when an Ethiopian Christian king tried to attack Mecca. But the Quran tells us in chapter 105, which is entitled The Elephant, that birds from the sky would not let this happen, and they dropped burning rocks and fire and brimstone on his army and killed this king and his elephant. And then as a result of this miraculous failed Christian expedition, Muhammad was born in that same year.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so date of birth is definitely not established. What else do we know about his early life?
Well, his early life, it seems to be based on a lot of, well, I keep hating to repeat myself, but if you have, for example, a young Muhammad about the year 10 years old is traveling with his uncle and a group of merchants in a caravan, and he wanders into the city of Basra, Syria, and there's this monk, Bahira, a Christian monk who recognizes Muhammad, who comes out holding these Christian scriptures. We're not sure exactly what they refer to. It could be some type of angelic visitation or personal revelations this monk had, and he was expecting the arrival of a young Arab prophet. He recognized Muhammad. The rocks along the path form themselves and form a path for Muhammad. You see the palm trees bend and give a young Muhammad shade. And another example of this comes from some of the non-canonical Gospels where you have the same events happen to a young Jesus when he leaves from Israel for a while to escape King Herod, and he goes down to Egypt. You have the same story that's applied to him. And there's other attributes. He's recognized as a prophet. They believe that he is going to be a prophet for the Arab people. So that's the picture that is painted. You have another example when Muhammad's a young boy, that the angel Gabriel appears to him the first time, and he throws Muhammad on the ground. He tears open his chest. He takes out his heart. He washes it. I think it's described as pure snow and water. And he says, I'm removing the clot of blood that was the Satan inside of you. He washes Muhammad's heart in the golden vessel, then puts it back in Muhammad, which is believed to have made him perfect from that point on in his mission as a prophet and his ability to receive the prophetic visions that were given to him later by Gabriel.
Wow. Yeah, well, where's that from?
That comes from the life of Muhammad, which dates to about the year 830, give or take. Now, there was an original version that was about 100 years earlier, but that was edited and revised several times by the current edition that we have, which dates, I said, about the year 830, which stands as the essential biographical story of Muhammad's life. And if you can find an English translation, I believe there's one by a French author from the early 19th century, I think, which is the only one you can really find. And it's fascinating to flip through there and try to find parallels with Christian monks or just ascetic monks living in the desert. And you can find a lot of that when you read through the 1,000 pages or so of that gigantic biography.
Now, what status do the biographies have in Islam? Or do they don't have any status at all?
You have the Quran, which is number one. Then you have the collection of the Hadith, which is collected hundreds of thousands of anecdotal sayings attributed to Muhammad, which cover every aspect of life from marriage to property to divorce, raising children, jihad, that sort of thing. And then you have the Sirah, which is the collection of the type of examples of Muhammad's life, and the biography fits along with those as well.
Okay. So they would not be authoritative like the Hadith, but they would still be like sacred? Is that
they're considered not really sacred, but type of, I guess for us it'd be like reading the Church Fathers, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lot of beneficial historical information, but it's not really anything that adds to doctrine or theology, for example.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, because it's a bit more confusing because there are some parallels, but there's also a lot of discontinuity with Christianity. You know, we have sacred scripture and sacred tradition, but the Hadiths they're a different kind of tradition. But they're authoritative, and then you have other literature that's like quasi-authoritative.
That's a good way to put it, because you have to recall that the pre-Islamic Arabian culture was based on oral traditions and tribal narratives, which relied on, this individual heard it from this individual, and you go back until, they learned this from Muhammad, and that's how they come up with the historical basis for some of these hadith to substantiate their authenticity. If Muhammad really said it, and we have a chain of people that heard it from him up until now in this generation, and that's what would accept it as authentic in their critique.
Very good. Well, we're chatting with Dr. Brian Bradford about Islam, Islam 101, the basics, and getting lots of great information. Stay tuned, everybody. More to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics.
This is Jesse Romero.
And I'm Terry Barber
from the Terry and Jesse Show, and we invite you to listen to the Holy Hour of Power, High Energy Catholic Radio. We're two Catholics with a PhD in common sense. We're on Monday through Friday on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
What we're going to give you is masculine Catholic teachings on the faith. We say we're too inspired to be tired, we're too protected to be dejected, and we're too renewed to be subdued. Why? Because we believe in Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church, and we will take each issue of the day and show you how the Catholic Church has the answer for our culture. What we really do is bring men back into the Catholic Church, which is about time to do. We want men to be leaders in their Catholic faith so that they can bring their family to heaven.
Our program is not right versus left, it's right versus wrong, and our program is where Catholicism and culture intersect. It's High Energy Catholic Radio.
We're going to inspire you to fall deeper in love with Jesus Christ and His bride, the Church.
The Terry and Jesse Show on the Virgin Most Powerful app.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow! That's 80%! realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-On Apologetics. We're talking about Islam, and we're talking with Dr. Brian Bradford. And Dr. Bradford, why don't we jump to the Quran? Let's talk about the genesis of the Quran. How is it? What's the story behind it? And tell us the interaction between Muhammad supposedly had with the angel Gabriel.
Well, Islam teaches that Muhammad used to meditate in a cave before he started Islam, and he sought true monotheism, what it was, how to reach it through meditation, and that sort of thing. Now, this happened in the cave of Hira, which is called the Mountain of Light or the Mountain of Illumination in Arabic. And the traditional account is that Muhammad was praying in the cave. Now, this is taken from the life of Muhammad. This is not a story that is from the Quran itself. That's something people don't realize. This comes much, much later after the Quran is put together. And it says in the biography, Muhammad says, he came to me, that is Gabriel, while I was asleep with a blanket. It says in the translation, a coverlet of brocade, which we translate into modern English as a type of blanket or a covering with some writing on it. And the angel said to me, read. And Muhammad responded, what shall I read? He pressed upon me so tightly that I thought it was death. And then he let me go and said again, read. And I said again, what shall I read? He pressed me again, and I thought it was death. And he let me go again and said, read. He pressed me with it a third time, and I thought it was death. And he said, read. And Muhammad said, what shall I read? And I only said I would read this to deliver myself from him. And what Gabriel told him turns out to be the first verse of the Quran, which is, read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot of blood. Read, your Lord is most generous, who taught you by the pen, taught that to men which they did not know. Now that is the first verse of the Quran, which actually numerically comes out to chapter 96, verses 1 through 5, because when the Quran is put together, it's put together just by the length of the verses with no real chronology or really any type of order to them at all. Now, the life of Muhammad continues that after I read this, he departed from me. So that verse, I think, is overlooked quite a bit when Muhammad says, I read it, and he departed from me. And it's always been Islam has always taught Muhammad was completely illiterate. Well, if he was illiterate, then why in his own biography does it say, I read this, and he departed from me? I've always had that question. I've never had a real satisfactory answer.
Yeah.
And then after this, Muhammad thought he was possessed by the devil. He wanted to go to a mountain and throw himself off because in pre-Islamic Arabian culture, it was believed if you were a poet, you were possessed by the devil, you spoke for the jinn and the genies, and people thought you were a type of soothsayer or fortune teller, and they wanted nothing to do with you. Well, Gabriel saved him and said, you are the apostle of God, and I am Gabriel, and then he departed from me. So that's the basis for the Quran starting. And that's the story that's in the life of Muhammad that tells us the first verses and how that happened. Now, the other times Gabriel would approach him, it would from about the year 610 until 632 is when the Islamic historians tell us that's when Muhammad received the revelations of the Quran, all 114 of them appearing at various times. Now, I don't want to get into the hadith, Gary, that details some of the the marital relations Muhammad would have while receiving revelations or afterwards. That's just something I think would make your audience too uncomfortable. And for me to go through and read those isn't very exciting either, to be honest with you. But But to be honest, now, what we have from the Christian sources and the Muslim sources that detail the physical characteristics that overcame Muhammad are very interesting. They say that he would have ringing in his ears. He would sweat profusely. He would turn bright red and breathe heavily. He would choke. He would move his lips quickly without speaking. He would hear trees and rocks speak to him. He would fall to the ground, trembling shoulders, his neck trembling. He would get a severe fever. The Muslim sources say he'd even snort like a camel, and he would fall to the ground suddenly. And these are all accepted hadith, and these are not invented Christian sources, but they're from the Muslim sources, which depict him almost as somebody, I guess, unstable when this kind of revelation would come upon him. Yeah. And Gabriel would often visit him once throughout the year to reorganize these verses and correct this and correct that and kind of reinterpret them to Muhammad so we could repeat them in a better revised version to his community.
Yeah, that last part. Now, is this where the idea of abrogation comes in, or is that something distinct from this?
People say it could be associated to that because the idea of abrogation is whatever Allah says first, he can change his mind, and whatever comes later on is the updated, authentic version of what we have.
Okay.
For example, there's 3 verses in the Quran that mention Christian monks. In one of them, they're the best of friends. In another one, they're proud doctors of the church, don't follow them. And the other one says, follow their example. So the hard thing is with the Quran to figure out the chronological order of these verses and how they fit into Muhammad's life. And for example, the Islamic histories tell us when Muhammad died and people went into his home to collect all these verses, there was just blank sheets laying in the corner. There was a couple of sheets here that had some writing, a couple pieces of bone over here. So they collected these all together, but there was no real uniform idea of the order of all of these. So it was very difficult to try to pinpoint, okay, where do we start?
Yeah. Yeah, so how do they sort out what is the earliest and what is the latest?
It's just based on some medieval Arabic. There was, I guess, the term for Bible criticism, if you have Quran criticism. It happened primarily around year 1000 to 1200, 1300, give or take, and then after that it kind of just didn't happen anymore. For example, Muhammad, his name is only mentioned 4 times in the Quran, and it's more of an honorary title. There's more titles that talking about this prophet. They refer to somebody as the witness, the well-guided one, the bringer of good news, the opener of faith, and that sort of thing. So an actual concrete individual understood as Muhammad coming up with these verses and these chapters is still a matter of considerable debate and question today as well.
Yeah. Yes, because, with the principle of abrogation, that Allah can say one thing and then change it later on, the chronology seems like it would be the most important thing, because how do you know which surahs are, still in effect and which ones have been abrogated?
Right. For example, the very last verses of the Quran talk about keeping individuals and believers safe from the jinn, from the genies. And you ask yourself, well, okay, did Muhammad still believe in those pre-Islamic Arabian pagan devils at this point? And if he did, then why that's still in there is something to keep an eye out for. So there's a lot of current Islamic, not just Islamic, but just an overall scholarly look at the Quran as a real historical document to figure out what came from what and when and that sort of thing. Yeah,
very good. And that's really interesting too. Like you said, the physical effects of his receiving revelation. That doesn't sound like something that would come out of Judeo-Christian culture. That sounds more like, the oracles. That was it, the Delphine oracles or something like that.
Right. Now, if we compare that to for example, Moses, when he sees the burning bush and he says, I have to go up and see what's happening here, he doesn't get any type of epileptic fit. I guess you could say that Muhammad was getting in these, and the Judeo-Christian idea of prophecy is a lot more calm and relaxing when God appears to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So how does Muhammad die?
Well, the story goes that a Jewish woman whose sons and male relatives have been killed by Muhammad in a raid says, I'm going to test and see if this man is a true prophet of God. I'm going to send him some dinner, and I'm going to poison it. And if he is a true prophet of God, he'll notice and not take a bite. So she poisons this food, sends it to Muhammad. He takes a bite, realizes there's something unsavory. He spits it out, and then he realizes he's been poisoned. And that's supposed to contribute to his death. It didn't kill him on the spot, but it contributed to stomach problems and ultimately was the thing that did kill him.
Yeah.
And
so,
I mean, when I was in Israel 20 years ago, the Jewish people tell me that's the root of the hatred for the Jews by the Muslims was this fact that a Jewish woman poisoned Muhammad.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So how solid is that historically?
Well, that's in the Muslim histories, so it's a good, polemic way to write in the Jews as poisoning their prophet and that sort of thing. But beyond that story, there was really no identifiable account of his death beyond that particular story.
Right. Yeah. Very interesting. Wow. And I know we just scratched the surface too. Just amazing information that you brought up, especially some of the prior sources and how some of the characteristics of Muhammad pre-existed Muhammad, and just wonderful work. How can people get a hold of some of your books?
My books are available on Amazon. I have Muhammad's Jesus. I have Arabian Religion Before Muhammad. I have a new one that came out earlier this year that's on I took a little step away from Islam, and I wrote one on the Greek language of the Nicene Creed and where that came from. And I'm doing a few studies. I'm working on one now that's the angel Gabriel and the Judeo-Christian tradition versus the Islamic Gabriel. So I hope to get that one done soon because that'll really open up a lot of eyes as well.
Yeah.
And I'm in the process of getting a website organized, and hopefully listening and everybody that's in your audience can get interested. And we need more Catholics to be aware of Islam and what it means and how it connects to our faith as well.
Very good. Well, definitely let us know when the website's up and running, and we'll have you back on the show.
Great. Thank you, Gary.
Oh, thank you. That's Dr. Brian Bradford. Talking about Muhammad, Quran, just lots of great information that you won't find anywhere else because he's done remarkable work in this area, folks. And boy, the hour is gone. It's the fastest hour in Catholic Talk Radio. It's already time to bring on even more fascinating talk with the Terry and Jesse Show. And time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here and turn off the dojo lights. It's been great to be with you today. Thank you so much for listening. And God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. Listening to cassette tapes transformed my daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.